I was supposed to come on stage with Cardi B music. It didn't happen, but it's probably better so that I don't start like doing some salsa moves before we start. My name is Jimena Almendares, and I'm going to be talking today about the lies we tell ourselves. And the reason why I named that the talk this way is because I work with a lot of products, mainly analytics, and I found the most interesting secrets about how the humans work and interact. So I'm going to show you some data about it. And we're going to talk about mainly three things. One, a quick intro. Then second, data about the lies we tell ourselves. And three, what does that mean when you're building product? As a quick intro on my life, I come from Mexico, and I ended up working in 16 countries. And sometimes I didn't really know the language, so that really led me to start thinking a lot about how could I understand people? Like sometimes how did they behave and how did they move, or just data. And that has really led into two things in which I think about life and product. One is data insights. I have done a lot around system dynamics, so I think about user flows and patterns so that I can start recognizing what is happening. And the other one is people insights. How do people behave? I had the fortune of working at Facebook super early on, and Eventbrite and Meetup, Zynga, and other places where you really get to know more about humans in the sense that they're telling you about their lives and things that are very personal sometimes. I was at OkCupid, actually, just as we went public. I was the chief product officer of OkCupid, and together with Tinder and Match, we went public in 2016. And now, as mentioned, I am the VP of Global Expansion for Intuit. That is the maker of QuickBooks, Mint, TurboTax. For those Americans in the audience, you might have used TurboTax recently to file your taxes. I know that I use them to file an extension. Right now I'm going around the world. Right now we're launching in Mexico and different countries, so we're basically deciding where should Intuit be in terms of products, the customer problem that we want to solve, and then where do we launch companies, where do we hire people, and things like that. So pretty fun. So going towards the lies we tell ourselves, and what do we say isn't always what we do or what we want. I'm going to start showing you some data. By the way, this data is public. You can check the OkCupid blog and so on. So just like show of hands, who knows about OkCupid? Yeah? Cool. OkCupid is a dating site, and when you join, you say, well, what is your sexual orientation, and then your gender. We actually have 22 genders and 13 orientations. And this is really important because we first know who you are, and then you tell us exactly who would you want. It's almost like going to a menu, and you're like, I want this type of person that is going to be between this age and the other, and this is going to be their race, or whatever you think it's really important. And you're basically just like putting on an order to say, I'm this person, but this is exactly who would I want in the ideal world. So that's an example of all of the data that we get on who people are and who do they want. And an example here is who the women want to date. This is a complex chart, but we're going to be using it fairly often, so let me explain it a little bit. So on the bottom, you have the women's age. And on the x-axis, you have the men's age. So where basically the middle is a woman who's 30 might want to be with someone who's 30. But then you have in the upper range people that she would date that would be older than herself, so that would be the red part. So as an example, a woman 35 might be wanting to date someone that is 40, and then the youngest allowable match is what you would have on green. So in this case, it would be about 30. So that's really interesting, right? It's like pretty much around the same age, a little bit older, actually not that much younger. And as you see, like things, the preferences for women are really constant. Basically, when they're very young, around 18, they really don't want people that are much younger than she is. And then as she ages, she actually starts evolving. So that is what women told us, right? Remember, when you go into the onboarding scene, they say, like, who exactly do you want to date? So that is the data that they gave us. Now I'm going to show you who are women proactively messaging. When they write someone a message, what do you think it's going to be? They already told us, right? So who they message should be exactly the same. Do you think it's going to be the same way? Well, this is actually who women message. It actually shows that women are much more flexible than they might seem at the beginning, what they even say in their profile. And it's really odd, right? Like, that's what they have in their profile. So if actually they're going to be messaging someone, why wouldn't they say in their profile that they're open to it? But there's actually much more flexibility. And what is interesting is that it's fairly the same around their age, except that the range is a little bit wider, so around 10 years. And what is really interesting too is that that last part, that it's actually as women start getting older, they start being more okay dating younger men, which I thought was really fantastic. So when you're designing product, then you're like, okay, should I be more flexible around those boundaries? But then, of course, if we're now talking about men and women in a really straight world, then what would you do about men? Are they going to be the same? And what do you think? It turns out that in some cases, men are like robots. And let me tell you why. Because this is the men's age and who they're saying that they could actually date when they're older, and it's usually just about 5 years older. It's like no matter how old men are, they're like, okay, 5 years, I can do that. But what do you think is going to happen on the lower age for men? They didn't really do math that well there. They're like, yeah, like 10 years, whatever, it's fine. So men say, this is again in their profiles, if say they're 25, they're going to be like 19 is good. And then they're 35, they're like 24 is good, 45, 30. So that's what men have in their profile. They're like, women, if this is your age, you can message me. But now what about the other way around? What do you think that men do? Who do men message? Do you want to see? So this is men, which shows us women that men are really flexible, very tolerant and inclusive. So it shows that men message slightly above their age, but as they age, they really just don't stop messaging those 18-year-olds. And that's the behavior. So now as a product manager, you're like, men, what am I going to do? Like women like their men older, and men, they just keep on liking the 18-year-old. So what am I going to do? Like if you have that 45-year-old woman, she's going to be okay dating someone her age or older, but the man that is her age is going to be really okay dating an 18-year-old. So that was an interesting part, right? Which shows you that on the one hand, if you're just really going by what people say, you're really limiting the number of people that you can match. But at the same time, the real behavior skews in different ways, and you really need to think about, well, it's actually can be exclusive. But here's what was really interesting. If we actually match both men and women, you have the starting range. And then in the much greener side where I put the keys, those were actually pockets of behavior that we could actually match both. So women could still date men that said, yes, I'm a little bit more flexible in the older age. And women, as they started being more flexible about dating older men, that meant that actually older men could date younger women. So that was really interesting. And actually in OkCupid, whilst we obviously observe what people say, sometimes we're a little bit more flexible because we know that there's actually much more flexibility even in terms of what our users want and what they say versus what they actually do. So now I can basically wrap it all up in terms of showing you how we can actually use analytics to build products. And the first learning is that you can actually understand products as system dynamics. System dynamics is a thing that I can totally nerd about, which is when you're thinking about online products, you can think about different behavior that you can have and also different factors. And where you're doing like product strategy, like a linear way to do things would be you have a goal, a problem, a decision, and a result. But what I really like is system dynamics, where you can actually think, if you have a decision, you change certain other behaviors that are actually not directly related, and then it actually is more of a circle, where you change something, that thing changes something else, which changes something else in return, and so on. So it's much more that when you put something out in the world, it actually has a ton of effects, and you need to start thinking about what those effects might be. So this is an example, actually, of a system that I built for OkCupid, which was, I will not go into the whole detail of this thing, but just to give you an idea, basically you start and you create your profile, and then you need to think about what are the questions that you're answering so you can have a match score. In OkCupid, so that all of you know, it's all about actually getting a score of how compatible you're with someone else. And for that to work, you actually need to have answer questions so that now we have data, and we say, you really care, say, about the type of movies that you watch, whether they're scary or not, or you really care about politics. So now we have all of this data, and now we can compare you to other people and how they have answered. So as I was doing this thing, I realized that we had put questions really late in the product, and sometimes people were coming in after they were doing the onboarding flow, and they just weren't actually getting to questions. So what that meant was that all of their scores were going to be super low because we just didn't have enough data, and we were saying, oh, you actually have a 40% match, when in reality it meant that we didn't have enough data to even get you to 100%. So that was a really interesting insight, and as you see there, let me see what I wrote there. It was like basically the impact on having photos on retention. So just in terms of if we just ran a normal correlation towards saying how much data have you given and what type of data have you given, it turns out that having answered questions was really important. So what we did was go actually observe the flow of how was OkCupid before in terms of profile and the different things that we would show you. And then based on this system, thinking what would happen if we could actually have people answer questions faster. So this was OkCupid before the redesign. And it would just be the normal flow, and again answering questions much later. And what we did was, this was actually really fun and very complex at the same time. We used to have questions where you would actually have to answer, like say, do you like, what type of movies do you like? Is it scary or non-scary? And instead we switched it to have it be binary. Do you like scary movies? Yes, no. And as you know, there's the swiping behavior. We actually found all of the questions that could be binary so that we could just basically turn them around in a yes-no format rather than words. And that was basically it. We added that swiping of the questions in the onboarding flow. And it turns out that we actually increased retention by 21%. By day 7, just by actually answering those questions before. And it was really fun because on OkCupid, all of the questions before, as mentioned, you would actually also need to say how important were they. But we understood that there were some type of questions that were polarizing. So people felt really strongly about it, and they would actually not all answer the same way. So that's how we actually, from 1,000 questions, we narrowed them down to 100, that then we could have in that binary way, and we could use previous data to inform how important they would be. So that was pretty fun. And actually, in 2015, that was Google discovered, as we put out this new flow, that we had completely changed retention. So Google pinged us, and they were like, guys, what did you just do? And then they asked us to show that onboarding flow in Google I/O, just because on their side, too, they saw the big effect that that type of thinking had on our onboarding flow. So another learning is that big wins might not come after one experiment, and you might need to fail many times. So at OkCupid, we would launch always many different variants of different experiences that we would want to launch. And an example here is that this was the previous, I think it's also an onboarding flow, registration. We would take you to home, and that was it. And based on the data that we had about questions, we were like, well, what if we actually added to the onboarding flow? And what are the different ways in which we might play with this thing? So one idea that we had was that as you were answering, you would actually see people that you could potentially be matching with, so that you could see like basically the faces of people. And the more you were answering, you could actually see who kind of like was matching with you. And the spoiler here is that that one didn't work. And we later on found out through Follow Me Homes that people were kind of like trying to game the system. And they were trying to figure out what type of questions would lead to the most attractive people. So that was really funny. The other one was like we would just have the questions, and then we would also ask you to tell us who would you find attractive, so that you would start having more data. So here the summary of things is that you see on the top all of the different experiments that we launched. So we had like control, full thing, full with tracker, which was that you would like someone, or simple with tracker, and then the different organization. But what you see, even though the data is fairly confidential right now, the flow, I don't know if it exists the same way, so it's less relevant. But what you can see is the winning versus control, that no matter what, we actually, by iterating so much, we had a much better impact on the different metrics that we cared about, from likes or the data that we had, retention, and so on. So that was really fun. And again, just a different way in which we could be playful and think about different ways in which we could create a flow and then finally select that one that we thought was the best in terms of the metrics that we cared about. So now I'm going to go to a very quick part of the presentation, which is just basically talking about 3 problems that you can have on the data side and how did we think about solving them on the product side. So the first one is that some people have more demand than others, and then you actually have a problem balancing supply and demand. What we're going to see now, it's actually how women are judged by men. And basically, you have a rating on attractiveness. In OkCupid before, you could give ratings like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 being the highest, kind of like with Uber. And then you could say how many people rated how many people in those high percentages. So for an example here, around 20% of people would be ranked at 4.5, and are also around 20% of people would be ranked at around 1.5. So that's really interesting. If you guys have learn some math, you know that this is almost like a normal distribution, would almost again mean that men are really acting like robots because they're basically rating women almost perfectly when there isn't that many women that they don't rate attractive or or bad looking, and a lot of them in the middle that they're like, yeah, average. So what do you think that it's going to happen, and how do you think that women will rate men? Let's actually do a show of hands. Do you think it's going to be similar? No? Well, you're right. We women are so tough. This is basically how women rate men, and it's either just mainly not very attractive and just a few that you're like, well, yes, I guess it's a 4. So what do we do that in OkCupid, right? You're like, okay, so you have a normal distribution for men, but apparently most men are a 2. So obviously, in this case, for our product, we needed to learn that just women are much more mean, and that basically their range between 0 and 4 is going to be basically 4 is the new 5. So that's basically how we went around it to say it's just not going to be that there's never going to be a match. It's just that people are grading each other differently, and we needed to understand that better so that we could actually have matches. Another thing is that humans like to reach up, and in product, and this is also a live lesson, everyone should reach out. And this is really fun. Again, going back to that attractiveness score, it turns out that this is basically the differential between your own attractiveness and the person that you are reaching out to. So here for men, let's see, if this 0 is how attractive they are, they tend to go for a 20% higher. And again, that's already after we accounted for the difference in women being tougher about rating men. So actually men are like, no, that woman that is really attractive, totally messaging her. And women, when they message, they don't message very often, I'll show you that in a second, they also reach up. So that basically tells you that when you receive, this is actually not something that sounds so good, but it's true, when you receive a message on your dating app, it's very likely that you're more attractive than the person that is messaging you. And what does that mean? We actually had to build things so that we would encourage women to message. Why? Because we as women sometimes are like, well, I can curate from my inbox, right? And the problem, though, is that if you're in 0, that's women's attractiveness. If you curate from your inbox, even if you select the most attractive of men that are messaging you, they're still going to be likely less attractive than you are. And the average, it's actually minus 5.1. But the good news for women is that when you message men, no matter how attractive, much more attractive they are than you, they actually answer back because there aren't that many women messaging. So basically, you have a 90% chance that men are going to answer. And because you're messaging, it's likely they're going to be more attractive than you are. So now we have a differential of from the women's attractiveness to about plus 6.5. But now think about the difference, right? The -5 to the plus 6.5, it's like an 11 points difference. So that's the winning part of saying when you actually reach out, you're gonna have more chances of having something better than in your inbox and getting an answer when you message. And that's something that I really, when I talk about career advice and so on, I think it's the same when you're saying, I want to work in this product or this project, you have more chances of having someone saying yes than if you just basically don't speak up. So now another third thing that has two different solutions. The third one is that humans are kind of superficial. And so what do you do in product? One thing is you can show uniqueness. So here's what we actually did at OkCupid. We had a variant 1. We just had photos and a bunch of text. And then we had another variant, which was basically showing different photos and more text that was basically showing different aspects of the person. And it turns out that as we were showing them both, it was the second one that won because people could actually see a little bit more of different characteristics of the person. And we really found that sometimes it's like, unless you have an amazing photo, people really like looking at least 3 photos of you so that they can see really how do you look. And therefore, just showing more information and showing the fun parts. We actually also had examples where if people would talk about quirky things, some people would find that really, really attractive. So the more you gave unique insights about yourself or the things you did the weekend, you had more chances of having a higher rating than if it was a really plain vanilla profile. So this is what we did with the old profile. We had a lot of text and just a big photo. And instead, what we did was reorganize it, and I put a cereal box because I was talking with my product team. I said, we can actually change this to be almost like a cereal box. You basically have the product, and you talk about the main features, and if people are super interested, then they can go around and look at the calories and things like that. But first, that you just will know that the thing is like crunchy and sweet. So the same thing with the new profile, you had the photo, and then you would say, like, what is my matching percentage? And we would show more aspects of the person's personality. In this case, we had all these different categories, and we would show you, is the person more independent, more scientific, athletic, and then just basically how you match in different areas of the personality. So that, say, for instance, you match 87% on ethics, you could click there and see all of those questions related to that. So it was a little bit more of an engaging experience if you wanted it. But if not, you could just basically have a high-level view of how who the person was, and then you could just make a decision quickly, rather than having to sift through a lot of text. And another way to solve the problem about humans sometimes being superficial is that you can distribute attention. So remember that we have a limited amount of people, right? And there's going to be those people that everyone thinks they're super attractive, so they're getting all of those stars. But then you have other people that are not. So how do you do with that, right? When you have these people that are getting a lot of messages, and you have the rest of the population that you also want to show and hopefully have matches with. So what we did was something that we call flavors. And we basically created these categories of people. Example, beard lovers, granule partiers, hardcore cuddlers. Those were people that had tattoos but were very sweet. We also had political junkies. So basically, we created these random things that we had the data, we had the questions, and we're like, we're just going to package them into a set of people that have certain attributes. And then it turns out actually that the beard lovers was one favorite for women. They just really liked that category. So we just basically had a bunch of guys that had beards. And we had 20 of those. And what you would do is that we would give you 10 matches amongst that category. So in this case, it would be women, it was the other way around, women that like guys with beards. And then you would actually have those 10 women, and then you could rate them. And what ended up happening is that, we could show you a vaster array of people, and now we were almost creating an experience where you are going to like at least 1, 2, or 3 of those people that we were showing you. So we were actually increasing the distribution of people being seen and people being liked, because now if you have a set of 10 people, it's very normal that you're going to end up choosing 2 or 3, versus when you're just like swiping, you could go with 10 people in a row that you actually don't like. So that was what was really fun, that once we created these new ways of showing people, we actually could expand the coverage, and we could also increase the number of likes. So parting words. It takes creativity and a lot of hard work to build great companies and product, but using data and an analytical approach can reveal and open new opportunities. So that was our case for flavors. And so whatever you do, whether you're dating, challenge, or future that you have, you need to learn, iterate, and please don't settle for vanilla. So with that, thank you.